I'm, hi, I'm Jenny. I'm the deputy city clerk, and I'm sorry you're stuck with me this evening. So I will do my best.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Louisville Planning Commission meeting of May 9th, 2024, with a roll call, please.
Commissioner Hunt,
She is not here this evening.
Commissioner Mahaley,
Present.
Commissioner Moline,
Here.
Commissioner Basket,
Here.
Commissioner Choi,
Here.
Commissioner Bangs,
Here.
Chair Broadnice.
Here. Thank you. And with that, then, a motion to approve this evening's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And no minutes this evening. I would like to open it up now for public comment for items that are not on the agenda. And as we look on that, can somebody look on the, or can you flip my screen? This is not
I
the
don't
screen.
see any hands raised.
Okay. Can you change my screen so that I could see the other people? Thanks. All right then, let's move into our first item of business. Jeff, are you able to introduce that briefly, or do you want me to just run into it? Or?
Yeah, there's not much to say other than we request that you all table that indefinitely. There's some unresolved issues, and we don't know when they want to come back.
Great, all right. And so my understanding is that the application has not been withdrawn, but if and when they do come back, it will be noticed again.
Correct, yeah, just as like a new application, basically.
Since we continued it today's date, we need to table it then, so.
Yeah, if you
with that,
table,
yeah,
yeah, if you table it indefinitely, I checked with the clerk that they could bring it back at any time, it just has to be
Great.
re-noticed, yeah.
thanks. With that, I would entertain a motion to table the PUD for 535 East South Boulder Road, formerly known or currently known as Resolution 3, Series 2024, indefinitely.
So moved. Second. Second.
And all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstentions? No? Well, that'll be one abstention, but great, thank you. With that, then yes, sure, go ahead. Oh,
I have a question for Jeff, and I don't know if you know the answer. I was curious if this project that we just tabled or was withdrawn, was there any issues because it was a drive-through?
we can't really even discuss that.
Can't discuss that, okay, sorry,
Yeah.
never mind.
It's not, yeah. All right, then we'll jump into our new business item.
Yes, so our consultants are on the line and ready to facilitate this, but we have a discussion tonight about the comprehensive plan. The last time that you all discussed this was back in March, and so tonight's discussion is about, there's a lot of new information, so they're going to present the existing conditions assessments and a preliminary report out on the community engagement results from the first round of community engagement. And then there's going to be a focused discussion around vision and values. So there's a lot to discuss, and there's a lot of questions in your packet, I know, but the consultant's just going to take it from here and kind of walk you all through it, if that's all right.
Great, thank you.
I'll turn it over to either Jessica or Allison, whoever's going first.
Yeah, thank you. God, would you mind giving me permission to share my screen?
That's yeah. Just a moment while we work on it.
Great, thanks.
Is it not letting you? Because according to my side, you should be able to share your screen.
It says host has disabled participant sharing.
You have to upgrade to something? No? Not you.
Yeah,
we
she is a
have to.
panelist.
Promote her to presenter, yes. That's that phrase we've heard.
I'm just gonna do that. Will it let you now, Jessica?
Yeah.
Jessica, can you share? It
Yeah,
says you
I
have co-host. Okay.
Yep. Give me just a moment.
Co-host too.
I think
We're gonna make you both
Sorry.
co-hosts.
hopefully you both have access to share your screen now. Sorry for the glitch.
Oh, that's okay.
Click yes.
Allison, I can if you'd like me to.
Yeah, I'm still not able. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you not able to click yes?
Hopefully.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
All right. Are you all able to see my screen now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We're really excited to be with you tonight. Kind of for the record, Jessica Garrow, I'm a principal with Design Workshop, and Allison Cody is with me, and she and I are going to run through our presentation tonight. We have a few slides. I know that there's a few maybe new commission members, and so we wanted to do a really quick high-level comprehensive plan introduction. Then we'll go through where are we now, and Allison's going to lead that piece in terms of going through our existing conditions assessments. We've got some questions for you during that portion, and then we want to go through what we've heard so far in the open house and survey and get into a conversation on vision and values, kind of continuing our conversation from our last meeting. Comprehensive plan is a guide for growth and development. It is a forward-looking document that thinks about the future and what is the future of Louisville going to look like and what are some of the ways that we can get there. It is a document that is required by the state of Colorado, and there are some important elements that need to be included in that. I think the other piece that is going to be a topic, I think, of future conversation are some changes in state law related to some additional planning elements on housing around transit areas. And so that's something that we'll be working through with staff over the summer and is potentially incorporated into the comprehensive plan. So it addresses the different elements within the community. So it ranges from culture and neighborhood character to land uses, transportation, housing, economy, natural environment. So it is, as its name suggests, very comprehensive. One of the things that's really important to understand is that it is not zoning and it's not land use standards, and it does not detail specific budget allocations. So it is that strategic guidebook, if you will, that then some of these things can be get its inspiration from the comprehensive plan, but the comprehensive plan is not that specific zoning. So the last comprehensive plan, your current comprehensive plan, is from 2013, and so much has changed since then. And so it's a great time to be digging into an update. We wanted to start with an overview of our overall process. You've seen this graphic before, but we're in this kind of transition moment from thinking about vision and trends and those existing conditions assessments into future framework and getting some additional feedback on how Louisville wants to grow in the future. And from there, we'll move into drafting the plan towards the end of the year and into the spring of 2025. So before we get specifically into the existing conditions report, we wanted to forecast a little bit about where we're going. So I mentioned thinking about kind of the strategic framework for growth and development. As we move through community engagement into the summer and fall, we are going to be doing some scenario planning exercises, and we referenced that in the cover memo that we provided with the packet. Scenario planning is a tool that we use as part of comprehensive plan processes to think about how do you want to grow in the future? What types of land uses, what types of development belong in which areas of the community? Which areas really should be preserved and not changed, right? So areas where you might be preserving open space or preserving historic character and buildings. So it allows us to start to understand that from the community. We also ground that in our existing conditions information, which is why we wanted to spend some time today to go through that to make sure there's clear understanding, see if you've got any questions about that before we pivot into this piece of really thinking about how do we grow into the future. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Allison, and she'll run through our existing conditions assessments, and then we'll come back and have some questions for you.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Can you all hear me okay? All right. So we began our existing conditions assessment by learning what you've done so far. So we know we're not starting from scratch. There's a lot of great work that's been done in the city to date. And so we looked at some of the previous studies all the way back to the 2013 comprehensive plan and several different transportation related plans and small area plans, as well as some sustainability plans, as all of these are pieces of what has led Louisville to be where it is today. There might be elements of these plans that are carried forward, and there might be some things of these plans that are left behind. And so we started here by understanding where you're at so that we can learn about where we're going. Next. We also had several different rounds of focus groups. And so for Louisville, we had some larger focus groups with our transportation and community-based partners. And then we had a lot of directed one-on-one conversations with local developers, staff, sustainability, and to really understand some of the different, more intricate pieces of different topical areas within the comprehensive plan element. And from this, we kind of got our first step into understanding the Louisville community and started to hear about some of the tensions that exist related to growth, especially around single family housing and higher density development where that happens, which will be an important conversation for this next stage to dig into a little bit more to understand where the community's at with what that means for the future. We heard about some city processes. We heard about vacancies in the downtown. And then a lot of conversation around post-fire shifts and how that trauma has really shifted some of the way that the demographics of the community as well as the housing in the community looks. And then we also heard a lot about traffic and congestion and some different areas of focus for that, as well as just this kind of real sense of community pride and really that downtown Louisville is the heart. And I would say that was reinforced from the community engagement that we heard, as well as this desire for the downtown portion of Louisville to really serve as a heart or a hub within the community. Next. So those were kind of two steps that led to the existing conditions assessments. These were included in the packet that you received. We have four different pieces of this. The existing conditions map atlas, which starts to look at the physical layout of parks and open space, current land uses, just understanding the mapping within the community. We are working with our partners at EPS, who did a detailed analysis of potential market growth and trends. Spirit Environmental looked at the environmental and sustainability aspects of the existing conditions. And finally, Fair and Peers looked at the transportation assessment, and they are very familiar, having worked on your transportation master plan. So finding a lot of alignment with opportunities there. I'm going to touch on some of the high level pieces of each of these, but certainly would welcome any further questions you have on the content within those assessments. So from a regional context, Louisville is really well located. I think that's part of what is a great asset of the community, being about a 20-minute drive time to both Boulder and Denver. And as such, you have a lot of employees commuting into Louisville for work. You'll see that reflected in the commuter data as well, especially with areas like CTC bringing in people from all across the region. And then there's a lot of, there's RTD buses as well as the light rail line that can help to support some of those multimodal movements. Looking a little bit more granular, the 3 Mile Plan is a piece of a comprehensive plan, thinking about what is within the radius, that 3 mile radius of Louisville. And so you have many neighboring communities, Superior, Lafayette, Erie, and Boulder. And so we have in our assessment looked at how do those communities compare and contrast to Louisville? And there are several IGAs or intergovernmental agreements in place with these communities as well as Boulder County to help manage some of the areas in and around Louisville. So this is a really important part of our comprehensive plan is understanding population and population growth. EPS's study digs into this in much more detail, but this is an important part of our understanding is getting the current population and understanding how that might change or shift into the future. You can see from the map that a good amount of Louisville's population is actually located at the core of the community. And as that red color gets lighter, you're seeing areas of less population. So really that downtown heart is supported by the higher density of housing and people living at the heart of Louisville. So that 3 Mile Plan, if you recall, we did some comparison of how does the city of Louisville compare to other cities and counties. And on the whole, Louisville is generally of higher income and of higher median age than the surrounding communities. But you'll also see a lower unemployment rate, which is further supported through some of our economic analysis on jobs within the community. So something to be aware of that stands out about Louisville is the little bit higher income and higher age demographic than some of your neighboring communities. And that kind of ties into this population peak in 2018, showing a loss of population from 2020 to 2022. And our population trends project that the population may be continuing to decline into the future. And there's probably some different pieces to that story, and some of the other aspects of what we'll share here might indicate why Louisville's population is trending downward. So as mentioned, Louisville has a higher income than the rest of Boulder County. This is just some graphs kind of indicating that, that kind of differential. Next. So regional trends and influence, this comes from the EPS report that really with CTC, flex space and research and development space has been a primary driver of real estate growth from the commercial and retail perspective since about 2010. And that is projected to continue to increase over the next 20 years. So employment growth is trending upward, and that population is trending downward. So I think that is an interesting dynamic at play in the Louisville community, according to the data. And so that kind of indicates that with that land availability, mixed use and multi-use retail will have some likely opportunities to expand, especially along McCaslin Boulevard and South Boulder Road. So it'll be looking and exploring a balance of what that means for the future. When we look at your current land uses, so this is the current zoning or the current zone districts. It shows kind of a different story that planned community commercial is the largest zone district, showing that there's the most opportunity, kind of most land area dedicated to that zone district within the community. and that residential low density is the second largest zone district. So a lot of Louisville land within your current zoning is dedicated towards planned communities or PUDs and residential low density, and that higher density is among the lowest percentage of those zone districts. And then kind of falling in the middle, you can see those community commercial and mixed uses at some of those employment centers throughout the community. And so we also kind of wanted to compare the existing land uses today with the 2013 future land use framework. So a future land use map is a key component of a comprehensive plan and what we'll be working towards. And I would say that this is kind of a non-traditional future land use map. It has 3 different development types: urban, suburban, and rural. And within each of these, there's different characteristics around density and typologies of how those different areas get built out. So you can see those urban, suburban, and rural on the map here really drive and indicate the types of density and building characteristics that can be built in those areas based on your future land use map today. I think, so Parks and Recreation, kind of getting into some of the environmental pieces, is a huge asset of the Louisville community. 98% of Louisville residents are within a 10-minute walk of a park. That is that's a pretty outstanding data point, and really speaks to your community and the access to open space and recreation that we heard also in the community survey is so important to many residents. So quite a significant number of parks, 45 compared to Lafayette and Superior, which were both in the 20 and 26 range. So I would say this is definitely a strength and an asset of the Louisville community. Where gaps do exist is within CTC and and the Red Tail Ridge area, where there is less focus on parks and less connectivity to those open spaces. And then with open space and trails, there's a lot of partnership. This is where those IGAs come back with Boulder County and Lafayette on shared management of these open spaces. And so I think that's another really great asset of kind of sharing management. And then also the Coal Creek corridor is just a really great ecological feature. Although our environmental assessment team did indicate that there's some signs of degradation. So kind of loss of habitat, loss of biodiversity from being in a more urbanized area. And I'm sure everyone is aware that from an environmental hazard, there's kind of an element of risk, especially within these open space areas, as drought continues to be a persistent challenge and temperatures increase, especially within those open spaces. Wildland mitigation and emergency preparedness will be really critical thinking towards the future. Although we will say that the Marshall Fire was a call to action, and Louisville's done some really wonderful work on resiliency and emergency preparedness planning for the future. But we can continue to build and grow on that to ensure the safety and health and wellness of the community. So from a transportation standpoint, the city of Louisville is very reliant on the personal vehicle. Transit is present in the Louisville community, though not highly utilized. But there are extensive bike lanes and a good amount of sidewalks with some areas of disconnection that you can see highlighted with the 2 red bubbles on the map. CTC shows some areas where the sidewalks are disconnected, and there's some disconnectedness with the rail line that comes through and allowing for crossings in that area. So from an overall transportation standpoint, there's a lot of opportunity to build on, as well as some areas for improvement. We also heard through focus groups and the community survey that congestion on some of the more primary roadways is a concern for residents, and we can start to look at how do we think about traffic and traffic flow on the primary roadways throughout the community. So I've shared a lot of the overall takeaways as I've walked through some of these pieces, but I'll just reiterate some things that really stand out is the higher median income and really higher cost of housing than surrounding communities. And this is part of what that balance will be looking at for the future. And so there is a lot of large lot single family housing and perhaps a gap in the mid to higher density or workforce and affordable housing options, just the way the land uses currently are, and because of the higher, the workforce coming in. As noted, population is trending downward. Age has been trending upward, and therefore school enrollment has been declining. So kind of an interesting push and pull of elements there. As noted, parks, open space, and recreation are really great assets within the community, but that mitigation of natural hazards and increasing biodiversity and environmental resilience will be important for the future. And then reiterating that the CTC and Red Tail Ridge and the increase of research and development within the community is really a strong asset. There's a strong employment base, but in contrast, there are vacancies in the downtown and along McCaslin Boulevard. And so finding that right balance of the economic growth and ensuring that the downtown can stay the heart will be another thing that we can look at moving forward. There's a high number of commuters. I think we took out the slide with the data on this, but there are a significant amount of commuters coming into Louisville and a significant amount of commuters leaving Louisville. Not a lot of people live and work in the community. And so I think that's something that we need to explore. I think it's in the jobs housing balance piece of the puzzle, and ensuring that people who are working in Louisville can afford to live in Louisville. And that ties into kind of transportation and congestion and transit, and all of that's really connected. And so I think this is a really interesting data point to highlight where there's opportunities to explore and improve to find that right balance. I think I've hit on most of these. There is a high presence of single family detached units and probably a gap in multifamily, although that has increased in the last 5 years or so. In general, residents would like to see more bike and pedestrian connectivity. And then once again, that there's some real biologically rich areas with Coal Creek Corridor that needs to be managed for the future. Next. So with that, we'd love to pause here. We have several questions, really digging into some of the details of what was in those existing conditions reports. But we'd love just for any high level questions you have on these assessments, anything that you think is missing, and then we can dig in some of these topically based questions and spend a little bit of time here. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. That is, I think, really interesting and insightful. Curious as to questions. Questions from, Commission? You want to start? Commissioner Mahaley.
Thank you for the presentation. You had a slide showing the relative risk factors of various open spaces. Could you go back to that one, please? And could you provide some more detail on how those risk categories were assessed? So like some are rated as high versus moderate. Can you talk about what the factors were and how those assessments were made?
Do you mind if I'm going to need to look at Spirit Environmental's report. Can I take a quick moment to look at that, and then I might be able to give you some better information on how that was specifically developed?
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thanks. In the meantime, do you have additional at that? Or we'll just kind of work our way across back and forth.
Yeah, thanks again. This is Commissioner Moline. So I'm going to dig in a little bit on the jobs and housing trends that you were seeing, and I'm just looking to make sure I understand the methods that you used. So I'm happen to be looking at them here. So we're looking at over 17,000 jobs versus 1,400 residents. And if I understood some of the methodology that I read, it appeared like that was kind of Louisville's anticipated share of the growth in both jobs and residents and population for the entire county. And so if I understood it right, you know, the way some of these numbers were generated was Louisville's share of this overall county growth. But I also wanted to ask if you had had a chance to, and if at least to some level, Louisville's specific like vacancy rates or anticipated or existing subdivisions that we anticipate will build out, if that has also played into your calculations or the methods for this.
Yeah, so I'll jump in on this one. So our partners at EPS, Economic Planning Systems, completed this work on the job analysis and population analysis. And you're absolutely right. This is the anticipated share of Louisville's population, kind of looking countywide as we look into the future, as well as jobs. And so they were taking existing information and doing some trend analysis related to what is anticipated potentially in the future at, for instance, like CTC and Centennial Valley Business Park, and trying to look at those trends and then project that into the future. And so it is a built on some assumptions there, but is kind of the best guess at this moment in how many jobs, and also looking at trends related to population.
Okay.
I guess, yeah, I'm still actually a little bit more confused. So it doesn't seem like we have room for 17,000 jobs. So is it purely just this numbers game of the region or the county is predicted to have X number of jobs, and this would be our concurrent number, our proportion of that, or?
Yeah, so it is a interesting trend that not every community has in terms of your employment growth is growing as anticipated right now to grow more significantly than your population growth.
Right, no, that part I understand, yeah, but, okay, maybe continue, sorry, I interrupted you
Yeah, so
because.
I guess because the city has developed a great, what I would call ecosystem for some of these like R&D type facilities, and there is some vacancy available in some of these areas, that is anticipated to just continue to grow. And at the same time, there's, at least right now, kind of as Allison shared in that summary, more land zoned for single family than multifamily. And so you're going to, in this moment, continue that trend. And so that's where that difference is. I think that part of what we will do as we move into our next stages of scenario planning is starting to really think through, is this 17,000 number, is that really realistic? Is that really how, as a community, you want to grow? And we'll use your feedback from the community at large to start to shape and identify, these are areas where it makes sense to focus some of this economic development and job growth. And we might have policies that speak to, 17,000 feels like too much. And so we want to make sure we're being strategic and thinking about the types of businesses and industries we're attracting to the city.
Yeah, and I guess, yeah, and I think I would hinge on that, is that number realistic? So go ahead, Commissioner Mahaley.
Poking at
and then
that a
we'll work
little
our way.
more, so is that just looking at vacancies and proposal rates, or is that factoring in specific industry trends on what industry is actually in Louisville, or how comprehensive is that projection? Is that just based on, how much room we have or we think we have, or is that actually factoring in industry trends?
They did factor in some industry trends related to the major employers and what are some trends there. So again, kind of that R&D, aerospace technologies, there's some, kind of upward trends there. And so that was factored in.
Additional follow-on down here on this issue, or nothing particular? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. So it says future, is it the next 10 years? And does it assume existing zoning supports this, or zoning changes would be required to support this? Is that known?
Great question, yeah.
Yeah, good question. So this is looking towards 2045, I think was the time frame that EPS used in the analysis. This is a what I would call a trends analysis. The right sizing, so to speak, is what happens when we get into the scenario planning and when we start to dig into the comprehensive plan and say, do we really want to see this amount of employment and job growth in the community? Maybe yes in certain areas, maybe no across the board, right? And so just that is why we do scenario planning, to kind of take this is maybe a trend under current potential conditions, current economic climate, and we want to make sure that the comprehensive plan doesn't just have this, running as it is, that there's some guardrails, so to speak, and some policies about employment and jobs and economic development.
I had a question that was somewhat related to this, whether it's 17,349 jobs or some other number. Iterative with the second to last bullet point, a lot of the transportation master plan from 2019 and some of the other more recent studies have focused on Louisville as the city, Louisville in the context of the rest of Boulder County. My question focused more on if we are expecting, or if we could plan for, a significant job growth, knowing that the majority of residents don't work here and the majority of workers don't live here. How have we gone outside just the box of Boulder County to look at even what's feasible for those enhancements to the transportation network that connects Louisville to, say, Denver or Longmont, or other areas that are outside of that 3-mile or 20-minute drive radius? Because I think that's a big thing that we talk, and we have talked a lot about housing types, even some jobs, but we haven't really focused a lot in our conversations about how those people get here or how our residents get somewhere else, since we do have a dearth of public transportation right now. Is RGD even part of the conversation, or willing to have the conversation with the city to say, here's how we could add another bus line, or maybe you could give us $30 million in taxes and we might not give you a light rail, or something along those lines.
Yeah. I think also related, I don't know if we want to jump into transportation yet or not, or can we jump back now to the first question about environmental hazards?
Yeah,
I've got more of that. I want to talk about transportation too, so.
Yeah, so I believe the question was, how was the criteria for that, for MAP, what assessed high risk? And so that was analyzed based on areas of higher burn probability, and that has to do with what type of so there are some areas where there are finer grasses or more contiguous areas where fires might spread more rapidly. So kind of the type of vegetation and the amount of space for that vegetation was a critical factor. And then they looked at also the criteria of where human structures are and the potential risk of wildfire damage to structure based treatment plant became higher because of that, whereas some of the areas might be lower or there's been mitigation done. And so therefore those fuels are less with more kind of water-based vegetation that won't burn as rapidly.
Great, thank you. I think that.
Thank you.
Just one thing to add on that, Chair, in the commission packet, starting on page 46, is the spirit section that talks about the environmental hazards and vulnerabilities, where some of those categories are listed out.
Great. Thanks. Maybe we can jump forward to that last slide with all the bullet points for discussions. More discussion, thoughts, questions, reactions. Just as a side, other than the fact that I'm getting older, this whole Louisville population is getting older issue, how does that compare to other cities? And what's the meaning of that in comparison to other cities?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one that we'll continue to explore in the process. But what we see is in communities that are aging and not adding as much younger population, it has to do with the availability of housing. Is part of what I think EPS found in their study is that the significant inventory of single family compared to multifamily and the cost difference between a multifamily product and a single family product is one of those reasons. I think nationwide there's some just changes in birth rates, so there's a decrease kind of overall in birth rates, but in areas where there's a lack of different types of housing, those areas tend to be less able to attract couples, young families, people who are growing their family, and that in this moment is true for Louisville.
Is there situations where a town just becomes older forever? Is that kind of the long-term game on that trend? That you get to a price point at which only people who have amassed fortunes can move in and live there?
Yeah, there can be that kind of that trajectory, and I think that is part of what we're hoping to explore through further community engagement in the process, is to hear from the community what would they like to see in terms of the people mix, right, within Louisville, not the development mix, but the people mix. And from there, we can help craft some ideas around policies. Is that related to land use and zoning and some of the things coming from the housing report about diversification of housing stock? Is it about other services that maybe the city doesn't provide, but there's partnerships in terms of childcare or education? And so I think there's lots of ways to address that if it's seen as a concern.
Great, thanks.
So I guess to rephrase Commissioner Chair Brown Eye's question a little bit differently, or just reword it, I think it would be insightful. So you showed us statistics for Louisville relative to Boulder County. I think what you're getting at is, is this trend of aging population and declining school enrollment, is that consistent countywide, or is that just a Louisville thing? I think we all have our suspicions, but it would be, I think it would be useful to see.
Yeah, and what are kind of long-term implications of that? Yeah.
Yeah, and we can, I think, go back and maybe get some more specific graphs and data points from EPS, but what I understand from talking with them and the work that we've done is it is something that's happening in Louisville more so than the rest of the county.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
please. Commissioner Basket.
I have a question about open space. So as I'm trying to work through what changes we might want to make in this comprehensive plan, we've identified housing as an issue. We keep talking about that. Do we know what the open space target is for Louisville? Like, are we really, have we acquired everything that we think we need?
I can, I don't know, I won't provide a great answer, but I know that, the Parks Department is looking to start their master plan actually later this year and sequencing it with the comp plan deliberately, the Post Master Plan, Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and Trails. So I think that's part of what they're going to look at and do a deep dive on. But we can tee up some of what could be in that plan in terms of better defining, the features of open space that we want to see, fire mitigation, things like that. But that kind of deep dive is slated to start as soon as, I think, the fall of this year.
Okay. I thought that the map in the materials you provided ahead of time that showed the vacant parcels was very helpful. And then I was trying to correlate that with the land uses for the vacancies and understand, because if we're going to try to get more housing, we're going to have to rezone perhaps some land. And then I was trying to mix in the open space component and figure out, just how are we going to fit everything in this city boundary. So that's all I have right now.
Great, thank you. Related to the fourth bullet point there regarding transportation, the slide didn't mention the Flatirons Flyer service along Highway 36 that I think Louisville does benefit from currently.
Not
I
in,
think you want to include
not-
that. What's that?
that's not in Louisville.
This side is. The other side isn't.
It serves McCaslin, which is considered.
Yeah,
Does, but it's not,
it serves us though.
right, but
Technically-
but I don't think there are any stops
Yeah, sure,
technically in Louisville.
Yeah, and McCaslin,
Park and ride on the theater side.
It does.
on both sides.
I know that stop's there, I don't know if that stop is
Because it's
technically in Louisville.
because it's on the highway, not
Yeah.
on city property.
Yeah.
But I think, well, in any case, it's an important part of our connectivity. As far as certain modes or locations to be considered, I guess that's what I want to know. Should we be considering other modes or locations? What makes sense for a city our size that we should try to plan for in the short, medium, and long term? What have other cities done that work well for a city of our size and densities?
And I think that's a great question, and part of what I was trying to get to, right, in terms of my inquiry about RTD's even willingness to participate in whatever our comprehensive plan comes up with. While we do have the Flatiron Flyer service and the AB1 service
Right.
that are on the 36 corridor, we have virtually no last mile connectivity. So
Right.
even if you want to take those mass transit options, you have to get in your car or get in your, or ride your bike in nice weather if you're closer to that side of town to be able to do that.
And, well, Flex Ride for that matter too, which is in Louisville.
Sure.
So, which is technically a last mile. And then also interested in learning more about, so Lafayette has the free ride, which I think is their Flex Ride, it's just free. And whether that's part of something we should be understanding a little bit better.
I'll jump in on this. Our figure 3 of Fair and Pierre's transportation assessment looks at those existing transit lines within the community, including bus routes. There is some limited bus routes that do go through the community. Although I will say, spoiler alert, we did hear from the community survey that increased transit and that last mile connection and more internal transit opportunities is desired by the community. And so this is something that the comprehensive plan can begin to look at what those opportunities might be. When it comes to RTD, they were participants in our focus groups and I think are willing to coordinate and collaborate to ensure that the needs of Louisville are being met. So based on how the community chooses to prioritize transit and how that connects to land use and future land use decisions, I think is a really interesting opportunity to explore for the future.
Please.
So I certainly agree with that, and I'd want to see what the Transportation Master Plan said about transit. One place we know that doesn't have transit is CTC, other than the Flex Ride that people can take as a first mile, last mile connection. Whenever you make somebody transfer, you lose a significant amount of the ridership, so that's not super desirable. RTD, I'm a year out from retirement, but my last conversations with RTD about adding bus service were a pretty hard no, that they hadn't gotten back to pre-pandemic levels of service, and they still are struggling with drivers and mechanics and things like that to run the organization at the viability that it had before the pandemic. However, one bright spot is that there was legislation passed last week that has to do with oil and gas, but that generates revenue that will be directed to transit. So that is really important news because we are one of the cities in the nation, not cities, excuse me, the transit districts in the nation that does not directly receive statewide funding for transit. So there may be a glimmer of hope for that. But it will be a lift from the staff and from the community to say what type of transit, where specifically we want, what skin of the game we would have for it. All those kinds of things are really important in terms of successful transit planning.
Just want to chime in really quick. I didn't mention all the state bills that passed yesterday that some of you may be following have big implications on the comp plan. We're not quite ready to see what those are yet because we don't know what the final bills look like yet because they just passed. But one of them, as part of the House Bill 1313, we clarified with RTD their long-term intent to have the Dash be a higher level of service than it currently is in Louisville. So right now it's 30 minutes between stops. Long-term, they want to make it 15-minute between stops. So they do have a priority for the Dash, at least, to be a higher level of service, yeah.
Cool, thank you. Any other additional thoughts on these 5 bullet points for the time being? Any other questions? Please, Commissioner Mahaley.
Yeah, I guess a thought on a second one. So the question there, what specific land uses or geographic areas are important to be thinking for focused housing? So, I think there's justified skepticism on the growth numbers, but I think the issue of housing and attainable housing is one that keeps coming up and one that I think we need to address certainly in the comp plan. So, I guess one would be the time to talk about, if we did decide to add housing, where should we do it? Is that something for now? Is that something after I think the next item is talking about the community feedback, right? Or I guess when should we start that discussion in this group as it pertains to the comprehensive plan?
Yeah, great question. So what I'll start with is I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation into the summer and fall. But starting that conversation now, if that feels appropriate for you all tonight, is fine. And I think it's an important issue. It's come up in our previous conversations with you. We know that it's a priority for the community from some of the initial feedback that we've heard. And so starting to think about that and talk through that now is good. And as we get into scenario planning, we're going to be coming back to you to talk through what that looks like and what we're hearing from the community. And so, as I said, I think it's going to be an ongoing conversation, and it's never too early to start that.
I'm eager to talk about that, but I'm wondering whether we should hear more about the feedback first.
Yeah, I'm open to.
Important part of our agenda, yeah.
Yeah, I just have one quick, I mean, it's related to Commissioner Mahaley's question and the comment from Commissioner Basket earlier about rezoning and what's up or what's potentially available. So I think Commissioner Basket asked the question about open space. A large proportion of the city is also designated agriculture. Is that feasibly available to be rezoned, or is that off limits, so to speak?
I mean, I think that's what Jessica mentioned. That can be part of our sort of like the starting of that discussion tonight. But I will note that council did actually adopt the housing plan on Tuesday night, and in that housing plan, by adopting it, they essentially sort of sanctioned the goals that are in that plan, which is to diversify our housing stock, increase residential development opportunities, and there is in there embedded some criteria for considering land use changes as one of our actions, and this is getting in the weeds, but not talking about open space and agricultural areas. I think, my sense would be there'd be a lot of resistance in looking in those areas, but we want to keep exploring that and seeing if there are some opportunities there, some areas not providing a lot of value for their purpose or whatever. But the housing plan, and this is obviously up to the stakeholders to decide, but the housing plan contemplated basically areas along our commercial corridors, McCaslin Corridor and South Boulder Road, in terms of areas that would be appropriate, underutilized areas. So there are some criteria contemplated in the housing plan that we hope gets in this comp plan, which is essentially, things like high vacancy rates, recent vacancy rates, underutilized large surface parking lots, access to services and transit, all the criteria that you could point to some of those areas along McCaslin. So I think if we had to do a geographic focus, we're hearing a lot of momentum for those kinds of areas, but I think we'd be open to talking about the other areas too. Any area, really. Yep.
Sure.
I'm going to shoehorn something that I wanted to talk about into the first bullet point. Do we have any questions about the information in the existing conditions assessment? My question is, why do we have so many categories for zoning? Oh my God, I really struggled with mixing and matching and trying to discern the colors that we're on. And I just wonder if it became a piggyback kind of thing, like, well, we'll just make a different category here to accommodate such and such. So one of the things that I see could be an outcome of this plan would be collapsing some of those categories. I think it would be easy for residents and businesses all around to do that. So I guess that was more of a statement than a question, but I think it does fit into bullet number 1.
I'd like to second that.
Yeah. No, interesting.
Yeah, I'll maybe also offer that as part of the comprehensive plan, we will have a future land use map that identifies different sort of land use categories. It's not zoning, but general land use categories that the city could then use to help update your zoning map to simplify it a little bit. So that's, I think, one of our goals in that process when we do future land use maps is to try to help communities simplify zoning, because so often it's been, many years since zoning was really looked at comprehensively. There might be new overlays that have been added on, and it can make it hard to read those maps. So that's in the back of our minds as we work on a future land use map.
Great. So I have a comment related to the transportation assessment and your question about are there certain modes or locations we should consider? So my observation is the explosion of electric bikes from adults and especially middle schoolers. I have some friends that have told me we gave our middle schooler an electric bike so we don't have to drive him to school anymore. That's awesome, but I don't think we have a lot of high comfort on-street bike lanes. Some of the street redesigns we've been doing. There's been experimentation around them, but I would flag that as an area of high importance.
Cool observation. Any other additional thoughts? Yeah, Commissioner Moline.
I was just going to say around this issue of kind of zoning and simplifying zoning, I think one of the things that was coming up for me and probably for everybody was, I want to say in one of the slides that you had was this high amount of single family of the lowest density. And I just sort of feel like if that's, that I'm sure in our housing plan, that's one of the other areas that we might look to for trying to address that and see if, I don't know exactly what some of the options might be there, but I just wanted to throw out that observation, so.
Sure, yeah.
On the last bullet, in the environmental assessment, are there any other environmental opportunities that should be considered? This body put quite a bit of time into a dark sky ordinance that was then a tie vote at City Council. We know that dark sky isn't just about seeing the stars. It's a lot about nature and the environment and bird migration and things like that. So I would like to not lose that.
I was just thinking about that.
All right,
Yes.
cool.
Yeah, that's a totally different issue. We'll have to contact our city council members perhaps on that one, I think. With that, I actually, jumping back to the housing issue, though, I do wonder, and this jumps back to a comment that was made by former Commissioner Krantz at our last meeting related to the housing plan and really how can we focus the housing plan on creating affordable housing, like really explicitly. So I think that's probably an important part of it moving forward when we look at these issues. With that, though, any additional thoughts? Are we at a point in the agenda here where a break would be, a 5-minute break would be appropriate?
Sure, your call.
That's
Yeah,
a-
sure.
Well, yeah, to the consultants too.
Yeah, that's fine. This is a transition point, so it's a good
Yeah.
time for.
So we're coming back to which part of it then?
Our next section will be going through what we've heard
Yeah.
on open house and survey.
Perfect.
And then we'll talk a little bit about some vision and values questions we've got for you.
Great, thanks. We'll take 5 minutes. Be back at 7:40. All right, we will welcome back everybody. Sorry about the slight overrun. With that then,
Great. Let me
very eager to hear this portion of it.
Sure. Great. Let's see. All right. Well, we are excited to share with you some initial findings from the open house and the community survey. We will have a comprehensive summary of findings from both of those activities here later this month that will get posted to the Engage Louisville website. So this is just a initial kind of high-level key takeaways summary, and there will be a lot more detail in that document, but we're happy to answer any questions that you might have on the material that we're going through. So we held a community open house on March 21st. That same day, we had also had a number of pop-up events. We had one at the library and one downtown with some business owners. And so had good participation there. Really pleased with the participation at the open house. I think many of you were there. We had over 200 participants, almost 250 participants. We got some demographics. It was a busy room, but we tried to understand who was there, who did we hear from. Most folks live and shop in Louisville. The majority of folks live in Louisville. Not very many non-Louisville residents were in attendance there. Most folks have lived in Louisville for quite a long time. So we had the most number of folks who live in the community for over 20 years and tended to be in the older age range, 50 to 70. That said, there were a number of young families that were in attendance, a number of kids, folks under 18, more so than we typically see in open houses. And so that was something that was really great to see with this open house. And I think part of that was the venue and kind of at the rec center. And so that's something that we're thinking about as we continue to have future engagement activities. The survey was open at the same time. So from mid-March through mid-April, we had just under 2,000 responses to the survey, which is a great survey response. This was an open survey that was available on the city's website and sent out through a number of social media posts, newsletters, emails, posters, things like that. Similarly, majority of the respondents were in that kind of older category, 20-year or more residents, and then kind of split amongst the other age groups. We heard from slightly younger group within the survey, so capturing that 40 to 49 was the most significant response to that question. Majority of the responses that we heard from are white or Caucasian, followed by Hispanic or Latino responses. We asked some questions about the Marshall Fire and how that impacted community members. And so a majority of the folks who responded to the survey said that they were not directly impacted, but it's affected them as a community member. And then we also tracked where people live to make sure that we were getting a good geographic dispersal of the community. And so you can see it was a pretty even kind of 33% split almost between the three council wards. So that was something that we were really pleased to see with. This is really good in terms of that overall geographic distribution. The other piece on our demographic questions, we asked if folks were homeowners or if they were renters. And so you can see the vast majority of the folks who completed the survey, 91%, are homeowners. In our more detailed report that we share with you later this month, we will be comparing how folks responded to these questions with the demographics from our demographic analysis, so you can see how that compares. So what did we hear? So again, kind of initial findings. We had a question in the survey as well as at the open house that asked folks to use one word to describe Louisville. And so you can see this word cloud here. The larger the word, the more times it was used. And so pretty significantly, folks said community, friendly, home, comfortable, quaint, charming, small town, safe. Those were all pretty common words that we heard. We also asked a number of open-ended questions, and folks at the open house were able to write on Post-it notes. And what we would say is an overall theme that we heard in the survey and at the open house is the importance of the small town character and charm and the quality of life that exists in Louisville, and that is something really special. And it's why people call Louisville home and why they want to live there and they want to have a business there. And so that is really important to be thinking about as we move forward. We asked about the 2013, 2014 plans core values and how people ranked those. We asked folks to rank those on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 being it's very important and 1 being it was not important. And there is strong support for all of the core values. And so part of what we want to dig in with you a little bit more tonight and into the summer as well, but really a conversation for tonight is how might we use those core values from the current plan as a jumping off point and thinking about how that maybe gets consolidated and worked into this updated plan, because they're all still valuable, but 14 core values is quite a bit. And so we want to think about some consolidation potentially. And then we asked some questions related to growth and development and some priorities. And so based off of those responses, desire for affordable housing, importance of safety in the community, importance around sustainability, downtown revitalization, and that improved transportation infrastructure. And all of these things were also pretty consistent with what we had heard through the focus groups. I am going to pause there where the next piece is kind of going into that vision and values conversation and looking at the goals from the 2013 plan. But before I do that, just want to see if you have any questions or comments on these slides or any of the information that was in the packet.
Commissioner Haley.
Thank you. And I think I noted this before, but as we continue to engage the community, I'd really like to know more about what people really mean when they say small town charm. It's a term I use, many others use, and I think that it resonates a different way with everybody and means different things. So in terms of, I think one of the questions that you have for us is what other questions can we ask and how can we continue to engage? I really think this is something we should focus on because it's something that I think a lot of people agree on, but understanding the aspects of that are most important, I think would be very insightful and very helpful to this process.
Thanks. One of the things that comes to mind for me is to try and, in your effort to kind of coordinate or, I don't know, simplify the sort of plan's core values. And I guess maybe one thing, it seems this is going to seem kind of trite, but I mean, it almost is like, can we use something like the word cloud or some of the survey findings to preliminarily sort of prioritize and group maybe some of those core values? That's just a thought. Because, seeing those highlight ones that you just went through, home, community, those kinds of ones, maybe those somehow sort of stand out a little bit. Anyway, just a thought.
Yeah, great.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think Jessica and Allison, I think we had a display board, if I'm remembering, at the open house that was, what does small town mean to you? Am I forgetting something? Yeah, I think, well, we don't have and we don't have the full results of all the engagements, so I think the answers to that Because there were a lot of responses on that
Yeah,
board.
I'd
if I
like to,
recall.
I'd like to
Yeah,
see
yeah.
where that board landed, and I want to see that continually asked, because, you know, just make sure we have as much engagement on that as possible, because I think that's the crux of what we're grappling with here.
I'm also curious to learn more about what a definition of improved transportation infrastructure is. Right, historically, that would mean highways. I don't think that's what any of us are after. So curious as to what that is defined as. Well, yeah, right. Is it that? Is it bike lanes? Is it, what is it?
Yeah, and it tends to be more on that multimodal transportation piece, pulling, again, some of the more detailed responses that we'll be sharing later this month.
Great. Any other thoughts on the initial feedback? All good? All right. Great, then. Yeah, I do look forward to data. I want raw data.
Yeah, and a spoiler alert for those who love to read survey responses, the survey instrument itself with all the open-ended responses is like 120 pages or something like that. So
Yeah, maybe not that much raw data, but
you can read it and put yourself to sleep, but we'll have a summary that goes along with it, as well as all of the responses, because it's really important that it's not just the summary, that you have that ability to dig into those. So we'll have that available for folks who are interested to dig into that detail.
great, thanks.
Yeah.
All right then, moving into the next section here.
Yeah. Allison, take it away.
Great, thanks. All right, next. These are the core values from the 2013 plan. We did have this board at the open house. People could read through it. And as Jessica mentioned, this was a specific question within the survey at the open house and at the pop-up events. I think these core values were at the library for several weeks. And we asked people, how important are these to you today? These are 10 years old, a little over. Do these still apply to the Louisville community? And for the most part, the answer was yes. Next slide. There's certainly some things that rose to the top. You can see what's highlighted in green. At the top are the responses that got the most support. So people valued those the highest, where the ones at the bottom started to fall, kind of fall lower on the spectrum of importance. Most everything was a 3 and above for people. However, connection to the city's heritage, civic participation, and volunteerism falling towards the bottom of the list, with safe neighborhoods, integrated open space, and fiscally responsible government being at the top of the list. And so this helps us to gauge where the community is at today when it comes to how important these values still are. If you want to go to the next slide. So we'd love to pause here. We did have a conversation with you all at our last planning commission meeting with you about these core values, and actually you mirrored the community's response. What we heard from you is these are all very important. And so we have two questions here. The first being, typically core values, a best practice is having between 5 and 7 core values. And these core values really do serve as kind of benchmarks or guideposts for future decision making. And so having maybe a smaller, more refined number might help with some of those measures. And so our thought is we did want to discuss with the commission, one of you commission members brought it up, do we want to see some consolidation so that these can help better serve that decision-making principle? There's certainly a lot of overlap within the existing core values as they are today. And then the second piece of our question, and we can kind of have this discussion together, is are there things that are missing? We heard from our last conversation with you that community sustainability, whether that's economic, housing, or environmental, is of critical importance. And that wasn't something that came up through the community discussion on core values. although I would say it was resonated in other parts of the open house and survey comments that we received. So I think we can have this conversation kind of back and forth, but the first being, you know, is there a consolidation of some of the values that we're seeing based on the feedback? And second, is there some additions based on where you're at today that we might want to consider? And this is important because we're going to be quickly moving into a refinement of what these core values are and using these as criteria that can help to guide the scenario planning for what's important for the future. We'd also like to bring these, some of these back to the community with some additional engagement over the summer, where we can dig a little bit deeper into some of those questions you identified. Like, we heard small town is important community value. What does that mean to you? So with that, I will open it up to all of you.
Could you go back one slide, I think, so we could see all those? Yeah.
Commissioner Haley.
Is the intent of combining them to gain a higher resolution and distinguishing the relative priority of the community amongst these values? Is that the core of what you're getting at and suggesting a combination?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the other piece that is a phrase some you hear sometimes is that if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority.
Yes.
And so if everything is equally weighted, how do you as a planning commission, how does city council, how do departments determine how to move forward on things like work program, on budgeting, on those types of things? And so having some clearer and maybe consolidated core values and goal statements can help you in that moving forward.
I hear that, and I definitely agree. And so I'm sure there was a method behind this questioning, or rather survey technique and question, the wording of the question itself. At the open house, I recall a few boards where you had to sort of like, amongst the options, pick 2 or pick 3. And so the way this was set up, if I recall correctly, someone could put a 5 on all of them, right? And so if we're trying to cut through this, because I think this is certainly valuable, understanding that yes, these things are highly important at this level of resolution. I think that's very valuable. And if we're going to dig deeper further into this, I think my first inclination, I mean, we should definitely talk through if we can combine some of these or maybe some overlap, but I would be curious to re-present this to the community and ask them to, if you had to pick, 2 or 3, what would your top choices be? And that would be a way to obtain that higher level of resolution without necessarily broadening and losing some of this insight.
And I guess I have questions too relating to it. So I guess one of my initial kind of knee-jerk reaction concerns is this just kind of a wordsmithing exercise? And if it's a wordsmithing exercise that has meaningful impact, how would that impact things in the 1, 5, 10-year range? And wouldn't we want kind of increased granularity, more colors in the picture than less? Contrasted with that thought of if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. I don't really have a problem with it as it is. But if you really believe we're going to be better served with 5 to 7 as a best practice, then yeah, we can move forward with it. I like that thought of pitching it back out though and having people prioritize to see how that.
Yeah, or just sort of iterating, like if we take, sorry, could you go back to the slide with the different categories? One approach could be you take the top, we could bin them based on, tiers, like, or there's a lot of ways you could do this, but if there's clearly a few that, like safe neighborhoods and integrated open space, if you take just the top half and ask people what their top choice would be, I think that would be insightful. And similarly on the bottom, you could do it in quadrants or 3 tiers, or
Yeah,
there's a lot of ways you
play
could cut
with
it.
it,
But
yeah.
I agree that I hesitate to lose this level of granularity, because each one of those things, I think, means something distinct.
Capture something, yeah.
Capture something, yeah.
Yeah, one question, I guess, observation. I mean, we've got to be careful, right? This is one input, one survey, less than 2,000 residents. So it's not as comprehensive as it might be. Because what I'm trying to reconcile, for example, is the recurring theme this evening and in previous conversations has been the focus on transportation. Transportation appears to be the third least important for these particular survey respondents, which is entirely counter to everything else we've discussed. So I don't want to get into the whys and wherefores of the survey methodology, but that one was a shocker to me. So we've got to be a bit careful, I think, with this singular input.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for making that. Commissioner Basket.
Could you please go to the other slide that has the community sustainability on it? No?
Further down in the next slide and keep,
Oh, the questions?
yeah, the questions to us, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Couple of
So
points there, yeah.
I was thinking that, as that's written there, community sustainability encompassing economic, housing, and environmental considerations, that kind of says a lot. And I was wondering if we might want to consider reshaping the guiding principles around this.
So couple thoughts on that one. One is, I'm curious, right, sustainability typically defined as economic, social, and environmental considerations. Was moving social, narrowing it down to housing intentional? And then also, within that, I think we could take all 14 of those and break those into each of those 3 categories. They could each be kind of identified as either an economic concern or a social concern or an environmental concern. I don't know where they would lead us. I don't know we need to do that, but it would be fairly easy to do.
One, if it's helpful, one thing that council told us the last time we talked to them is that, to frame the discussion, what I heard was that there could be an overarching lens on all of these that is at that higher level, the sustainability level. So that you almost like tier the values, not saying that's how we would do it, but if all of them are viewed through the lens of sustainability in terms of the 3 stools, and equity, diversity, inclusion, those were the things that they were like, that should permeate through all of these things. So there's almost like layers to it, the way that their initial feedback was going. So that could be one way of looking at consolidating it, if you have that overarching lens, and then you have the granularity underneath it. Just food for thought.
Back to the, well, if one of the consultants could respond to that, though, was social meant to be boiled down to only housing, or?
So I think when we were crafting this, it was based off of what we thought we heard from our last conversation with you, and housing was the piece that came out of that conversation versus social. So we would kind of take our lead, I guess, from you all now in thinking, is housing too specific here? And it is more broadly kind of social sustainability, and maybe housing as a piece of that, in addition to other factors.
Right, I mean, in the other words, people, planet, profits, it's the people portion of it, whether you call it social or people or cultural, or I would steer away from boiling it down to housing.
I guess maybe a direct question is, as we try to move the work forward and into some engagement here early in the summer, does it make sense from your perspective to maybe test out this idea of community sustainability and getting some feedback and seeing how that resonates as maybe a set of core principles that the plan could be organized around?
He says
I mean, I think, yeah, to Commissioner Baskett's comment, that there's a risk that that just becomes too broad, in my opinion. I mean, if you're going to, community sustainability, as it's worded here, economic, housing, environmental, I mean, what doesn't it encompass? I mean, transportation perhaps is the only one that's not on that list, but that probably falls under environmental as well.
And social, yeah. No, I mean, that is the broadest umbrella, to be certain, I think.
So if I can add a perspective on this, right, ultimately the comprehensive plan takes a very broad idea that says, let's be comprehensive. And it distills it down through various components. To some point in the plan, you get to actionable items, right? So taking the idea that everything that's in the plan is considered under the lens of social, environmental, economic components, I don't know that it matters all that much that if you go one layer above and you put a bigger umbrella and you say community sustainability, that detracts from that idea of the specificity from each one of those as you further branch down the tree, right? And I see that idea, and if we can flip to the next slide, just so everybody else can see it, of the 14 values, I think that, actually the chart was better. Thank you. I see that as taking these that are broad values, right, where having 14 of them that clearly for everyone who's self-selected into taking the survey value, they all value these values to some degree, right? These should be filtered down and maybe reconfigured a little bit in the right way so that the level of specificity is at that appropriate level where you come down from that large, overarching umbrella. I do think that, taking these as they were and then trying to prioritize them amongst the 14 of them is potentially creating, if you were to take two of these and say which one's more important, that's creating a false dichotomy where there's not necessarily the reason why one has to be more important than the other, because they could fall on different branches in that tree. Some of these things aren't really values, right? They could be more action items. Families and individuals, that's not a value, that's just a thing, right? So categorizing, safe neighborhoods, well, to Commissioner Mahaley's question earlier, what does small town mean? What does safe neighborhoods mean? Does it mean there's no crime? Does it mean there are no middle schoolers zipping by at 30 miles an hour on electric bikes as you try to cross the crosswalk? Like, who knows what that means, right? So that doesn't need to be a value, but that can be filtered down into some of those branches along the tree. But you can group them into, as we're being asked here by Jessica and Allison, into bigger topics, right? Of, okay, integrated open space and trail networks, even ecological diversity, even balanced transportation system, right? Some sustainable economic and environmental practices. This could all be grouped into one theme or one focus area where then you, again, filter down, and then you get to finally down at that point where you have the specific items that make up the plan, the actions, right? So I think there's a way to take all of those things, put it in the right context of what is the overarching umbrella that permeates everything all the way through, group the values that everybody who's, again, self-selected into taking the survey already value, but put them into the themes that then permeate down to the actual items. That was just more of a rant than anything else.
Yeah,
So instead, so to say it another way, you're categorizing actionable content and as opposed to combining values.
yeah. I was going to hop into and just sort of say the same thing. I appreciate that, Commissioner Choi. I think, as you've pointed out, I think it's maybe in some ways getting back to what Chair Brauneis said too. Some of these values it's good for us to remember what they are, and they have their place in the plan, but they may not all lead to sort of the things that are going to be actionable. So it's almost like sort of a reference of what's valuable to the community. But I like this idea of sort of crosswalking that then into groups that the plan can then focus on getting, and sort of where you're elevating the things that we've been talking about, housing and transportation, and the things that the plan is likely to do from a land use perspective, and sort of crosswalking those broader categories of what the plan can do, and saying, you know, these tactics are going to address these sorts of values, I guess. And I don't know, that just another thought.
Yeah, so like, I resonated with something you said. Like, there's several of these, you know, building off what Commissioner Choi said, that are more directly tied to land use.
Right.
Right, and you can pull those out, right? And that's not to say that the other ones aren't important, but from a land use perspective, in terms of distilling down what the priority should be for land use, it would be better to consider those separate from some of the other ones that are less directly tied to
The comp plan.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, from the consultant's perspective, are you hearing enough of what you need out of this? Do you have follow-up questions for us?
No, I think that this is really helpful. Allison, is there anything that it sparks for you?
No, I think you brought up some good points. I'm excited. I think the next phase of engagement can dig in a little bit to what this means. You've brought it up a couple times of what does small town mean? What does safe neighborhoods mean? I think that'll be an excellent deeper dive into these with the community to refine these and seek more understanding. So thank you for bringing that up. I think those are some great points.
All right, then. Was there anything further, Commissioner Choi?
I just wanted to ask, as we go through more of these sessions, Jessica and Allison, is there a plan to bring in any of your sub-consultants to these meetings if we want to be able to, you know, ask some of these questions directly to the work that they've performed?
So at this point, we don't have any anticipated. What I would say is if you've got some specific questions, if you could share those with Jeff, then we can make sure that we can get those with our sub-consultants as we move forward. And we can also talk with them about potentially coming to a future meeting, but that's currently not scheduled.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great. All right. Next steps.
Say next step. So we will have the community engagement summary next week, anticipated to be available May 15th on Engage Louisville. So that'll be the more complete summary of what we've heard. We currently have a work session scheduled with City Council on June 4th. And then we'll be digging into, as Allison said, these kind of vision and values and goals, conversations and community engagement, June and July. And we have our scenario planning scheduled for the fall, right now tentatively scheduled in September, to dive into how does all of this end up working on a future land use map, essentially. So we're excited to do that. And with that, we'll just say thank you so much for your time. Feedback tonight was really helpful, and we are excited to continue on in the process.
And thank you both for, I know there's a lot of work, many hours that go into all of this. So Allison and Jessica, thank you for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, with that then, we'll bring it back here. Jeff, do you have anything else? Jeff Hurt, do you have anything else on this you wanted to wrap up with, or?
Regarding comp plan?
Yeah.
The only thing that I didn't mention was just regarding the values. Just to let you know, our city manager's office is really interested in using these values more broadly than just in the planning kind of lane. So they're actively engaged in this as well in terms of things like city budgeting and overall city prioritization. So we're hopeful that they'll have broad applicability.
Interesting, cool. That's exciting to hear. Action, nice.
Yep.
Yeah, no. I mean, it is more than just wordsmithing at that point. It's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
All right then, with that then, I think we'll wrap up this discussion. Move into any planning commission comments for the evening or month. Seeing none, open up for staff comments.
The only thing I was just going to mention is just to acknowledge again that the bills that passed yesterday, there's a number of them that very much impact planning and housing in Louisville. And like I said, we're digesting them and going to do a full sort of legislative analysis to figure out what we need to do to respond to them. The big ones, though, happy to talk about them tonight, not having done that deep dive yet, but the big ones are House Bill 1313, which is the Transit-Oriented Communities Bill, that would actually mandate that cities, including Louisville, zone for a certain level of residential density within our defined transit areas, state-defined transit areas. And so that is actually an opportune time in terms of the comp plan and being able to align those two. It's aggressive, the bill is, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds before we fully understand it, but the density targets are pretty aggressive. So that's a big one we're tracking. The ADU bill, accessory dwelling unit bill, did pass as well, and that would mandate that all cities, eligible cities, which we're one, would have to allow accessory dwelling units on all lots for that have single family as the primary use. So there's all kinds of restrictions in there in terms of what we can't do. We can't require parking. We can't require, I believe, an owner occupancy. There's a lot of things in that bill that are aggressive, but it's become state law, so we're going to need to comply with. We need to figure out how to do that. Another big one that passed is that we as a city can't mandate minimum parking requirements for residential, for multifamily residential, which is a big change for us as well. And so we need to fully understand what that means and all the devil in the details kind of things. And then the other one that passed that comes to mind is a prohibition on defining the number of people, unrelated people that can live in a house, which we're behind on, frankly. And I think it's a very kind of simple, clean bill, but we will have to update our definition of what a family is, which currently says two unrelated individuals or no more than, I forget exactly what it says, but we need to update that definition to align with state law as well. Yeah.
So Jeff, do you think that's something that you'll talk about how those new bills could impact the comprehensive planning process that we're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. The transit-oriented communities bill, the one with the density requirements, is really the big one that is going to need to be embedded in our future land use kind of scenario options, because we're going to need to comply with that, obviously. So for example, within a half a mile of the McCaslin Park and Ride station, there's a certain density target the state would mandate. And we currently don't have a lot of zoning that allows any residential in that area. It actually aligns with the sort of the trajectory we're going in terms of looking at residential in those areas, but it would force our hand a bit to be more assertive in that. And so that particular one is going to be very much need to be part of the discussion of future land use scenarios, and we'll come back to you on that. The ADU one, we're already looking to move forward with a zoning code amendment, and that changes that conversation a lot in terms of like, we no longer have a lot of the policy decisions at a local level that we were about to discuss, parking size, setbacks, impacts. The state has kind of overridden us on a lot of those things. And so we're trying to figure out what from that bill we could make Louisville specific if we needed to in terms of neighborhood impacts and things of that nature. But so changes the conversation for sure. Yeah.
So do you think you'll bring, like, this is really helpful to hear. I guess I haven't been paying close enough attention to what the state is doing. I mean, do you think you can bring an analysis to us or something, a summary, or provide, email us a summary?
Yeah,
or something?
that's the plan. I think
Okay.
at your next meeting, there'll be a memo just summarizing what happened, what it means for us, and what we need to do to respond. We are actually going to city council kind of last minute on Tuesday to give them a quick legislative briefing on all these things.
Okay.
It'll again be really high level because if you ever have to read these bills, they're painful to read. I mean, just what does that even mean? Are we okay? You know, all that kind of stuff. And so we don't want to jump to a conclusion but we had been tracking the big one, the transit-oriented communities one, and are more confident in what that one means than the others, and confident that it's going to have a pretty big impact on what we do for the comp plan and a lot of things. Yeah. So.
Great, yeah. Which brings us to the next fact that we don't have a next meeting. Nothing planned for next month at this time.
No, but there's a number of developments that are just itching to get to Planning Commission that are really close. So I think you'll start to see a flip, not a flip, but you'll start to see policy questions like this, but specific development proposals here soon. There's at least 4 or 5 that are trying to get on the docket, so you'll be seeing more of those.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. With that then, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.